Good evening, everyone present here. I am Yasir Affan, first year student of Masters in English Literature from the Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University. And I welcome you all to the Raleigh Literary Festival 1.2 and the conference organized by the Raleigh Literary Society of the Department of English, one of the oldest student body societies of India. The theme of this session is psychology and literature, and there has been a change in the session's chair. I'd like to inform beforehand. We are fortunate to have not one but two distinguished professors chairing the session. It will now be chaired by Professor Aisha Munira Rashid from the Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University. With expertise in the fields of gender studies, literature, education, Dr. Rashid has made a significant contribution to her academic discipline. Throughout her academic journey, Dr. Rashid has received numerous accolades and scholarships for her outstanding achievements. She was awarded a prestigious scholarship by the U.S. Department of State for a 10-week course on assessment practices in language learning and teaching at the University of Oregon. She excelled in this course, achieving remarkable 95 grade. In addition to her academic accomplishment, Dr. Rashid has actively engaged in professional development and training workshops. She participated in a workshop on designing course objectives and
Affan, you can make it short, or you can
sure, ma'am.
just
Actually.
take the profile. That was very short. I think I made it short.
Just give me. In addition to her academic accomplishments, Dr. Rashid has actively engaged in professional development and training workshops. She participated in a workshop on designing course objectives and alternative assessments organized by the Department of English, AMU, in collaboration with the regional English language office of the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi. She has also completed a course on the fundamentals of assessments from TESOL, Arabia. With extensive teaching experience, Dr. Rashid has held various positions within the Department of English at AMU. She currently serves as a professor of English since October 2017, and previously English held the position of associate professor from September 2014 to October 2017. With a profound knowledge, research, expertise, and dedication to education, Dr. Aisha Munira Rashid continues to inspire and influence students and colleagues in the field of English literature and gender studies at Aligarh University. Now, on to our second chair, Muhammad Siddiq Khan is an assistant professor in the Department of English, Lucknow University. Sir is an eminent scholar known for his professionalism and dedication. Within his thrust area comes South Asian literature, Indian writing in English, literature in translation. He has a special interest in the poetry of Agha Shahid Ali and Faiz Ahmad Faiz. Sir has several publications, articles, and research papers under his belt, which have appeared in esteemed journals like Routledge. Apart from such credentials, Sir is a recipient of Maulana Azad National Fellowship in 2022. We are very glad to have you both sharing this session. Now, without further ado, we will get to the presentations. I'd like to outline the structure of this session and certain guidelines for a smooth proceeding. The presenters will be given 12 minutes to present their paper and are kindly requested to abide by the time limit. Once 10 minutes have passed, they'll be asked to wrap their presentations quickly. At the end of each presentation, sir and ma'am both will give their remarks, followed by questions from the attendees as well as the chairs as well. Once all the papers have been presented, both will give their final remarks on the overall session, and then we will conclude. There are 4 papers lined up for this session. I'll be now calling our first presenter, Sehaj Kumar Tivana, whose paper is titled Legacy of Shell Shock Through the People's Lens. Over to you, Ms. Sehaj. I don't think Sehaj is present with us, so I'd like to quickly move on to our next presenter, which will be actually it's a collaborative paper written by Simanta Nandi and Angana Singha Roy from Jadavpur University. And the title of the paper is Maladaptive Daydreaming Syndrome, Postmemory, and the Re-Expressing of the Past. Over to you guys.
Very good evening to each and everyone present here. The title of our paper is Maladaptive Daydreaming Syndrome, Post-Memory and the Re-Expression of the Past. And I'll be reading the paper and my friend Shimonto Nondi will be presenting the slides. So the paper goes like this. Maladaptive daydreaming was first characterized in 2002 and isn't yet perceived in the symptomatic and measurable manual of mental problems. The predominance of maladaptive daydreaming is obscure, yet the condition gives off an impression of being more normal among individuals with nervousness, gloom, or fanatical habitual problem. Overportion of maladaptive daydreamers have an emotional well-being problem. In some cases, known as wandering off in daydreaming land jumble, maladaptive daydreaming depicts a condition where an individual consistently encounters stares off into space that are extraordinary and exceptionally diverting. So diverting, as a matter of fact, that the individual might quit drawing in with the undertaking or individuals before them. These daydreaming might be set off by genuine occasions or on the other hand boosts like a clamor, smell, discussion point, or film. Maladaptive daydreamers' dreamlands are distinctive and fulfilling, and the need to proceed with the dream can be urgent and habit forming. With maladaptive daydreaming off into space, there's a compelling impulse to fantasize and inconvenience when it's impractical or interfere. Scientists suspect that individuals who battle with maladaptive daydreaming might have an inborn capacity for vivid creative dreams. Many find this capacity right off the bat in adolescence, acknowledging dreams and fantasies can be utilized to direct trouble. By making an internal universe of solace, they are ready to escape from the real world. Research recommends that our brains meander near 50% of the time, and we utilize these physiological excursions to envision our lives in every kind of tomfoolery and whimsical situations. We fantasize about the ideal, neat, charming, or beginning an interesting new vocation, or what we do with superpowers or unrestrained sexual experiences. From that point forward, other contextual investigations have checked out as maladaptive daydreamers and gathered a rundown of possible side effects. These incorporate clear, luxuriously itemized fantasies, unusually lengthy staring off into space meetings, wanders off in fantasy land, set off by genuine occasions, wandering off in fantasy land meetings that handle rest. Experience while wandering off in fantasy land. Fantasyland myth. Victims make a complex inward world with which they departure to in the midst of pain by fantasizing for a really long time. Presently, research has revealed insight upon the locus of the cerebrum that are essential for creative mind and showed that the ability to think past the flow second is disturbed in dementia. Enactment in the default network is seen across various key mind areas, remembering structures for the prefrontal cortex, average fleeting curves, and districts found somewhere inside the parietal cortex. Amazingly, this mind network is enlisted at whatever point we recall the past or envision what's to come. This discovery proposed that we might have developed to consider elective points of view, which gives a lot of adaptability in our regular daily exercises. As opposed to effectively captivating in specific ways of behaving, we can taste our activities ahead of time, actually conceiving their results and keeping away from exorbitant mix-ups. The default network is additionally dynamic when we envision what another person might be thinking or feeling. This capacity to see the value in the points of view of others permits us to work effectively in the social world and to show compassion and understanding toward others. The concept of post-memory developed by Marian Hirsch refers to the relationship between generations who did not directly experience a particular event but have an indirect inherited knowledge of it. Post-memory involves the transmission of memories from one generation to another, creating a connection to past experiences that have a profound impact on the present generation's identity and imagination. The link between MGS and post memory lies in the expression of past experiences through daydreaming. Individuals with MDS may utilize daydreams as a means to connect with and process inherited or inexperienced memories directly. Through their elaborate daydreams, they can immerse themselves in narratives that evoke past events, emotions, or themes, even if they haven't directly experienced them. Post-memory refers to the transmission of memories from one generation to another, particularly in the context of traumatic events or significant historical experiences that individuals did not directly experience, but were passed down through their family or cultural narratives. Maladaptive daydreaming syndrome is a physiological condition characterized by excessive and immersive daydreaming that interferes with daily functioning. While there is limited research specifically examining the relationship between post-memory and MDS, it is possible to consider the potential influence of post-memory on the context, themes, and emotional intensity of daydreams in individuals with this syndrome. Post-memory can shape an individual's worldview, beliefs, and emotional responses, which can manifest in various ways, including daydreams. People with post-memory may incorporate the experiences, emotions, and themes associated with transmitted memories into their daydreams. For individuals with MDS, these daydreams can be vivid and consuming, often serving as an escape or coping mechanism. Post-memory may amplify the emotional intensity of daydreams by evoking inherited traumas, emotions, and narratives associated with the transmitted memory. The content and themes of daydreams in individuals with MDS may reflect the historical or personal events embedded in their post-memory. These daydreams might involve reenactments or reinterpretations of events, personal or collective struggles, or themes of loss, resilience, and identity. Post-memory can contribute to the richness and complexity of these daydreams, as individuals with MDS may subconsciously draw upon the transmitted memories to create intricate storylines and characters. Firstly, individuals with MDS often have vivid and immersive daydreaming experiences that can be highly detailed and emotionally charged. These daydreams can consume significant amounts of their time and attention, potentially influencing their cognitive and emotional state. As a result, it is hypothesized that this intense engagement with daydreaming may lead to heightened levels of post-memory, as individuals with MDS may incorporate elements from their ancestral memories into their daydreams. Imagination is another crucial component intertwined with MDS. It allows individuals to construct and manipulate mental imagery, enabling the creation of elaborate daydreams. Imagination acts as a fertile ground for the manifestation of desires, aspirations, and emotional processing. In the context of MDS, individuals may have a heightened imaginative capacity, facilitating the construction of intrinsic daydreaming worlds. The ability to vividly imagine and immerse oneself into these mental landscapes may be both a predisposing factor and a consequence of the syndrome. Inherited trauma, also known as transgenerational trauma, refers to the transmission of the psychological and emotional effects of traumatic events across generations. It is believed that the intergenerational transmission of trauma may alter the expression of genes associated with stress response and emotional regulation, potentially increasing the risk of developing maladaptive daydreaming behaviors. Understanding the interplay between memory, imagination, and inherited trauma in the context of MDS requires a multidimensional approach. Research integrating neurobiological, psychological, and genetic perspectives is needed to unravel the underlying mechanisms. By studying the neural circuits involved in memory retrieval, imagination, and stress response, researchers may shed light on the neural basis of MDS. Additionally, investigating the role of epigenetic modifications which can regulate gene expression without altering the underlying DNA sequence may provide insights into the inheritance of trauma-related vulnerabilities. The immersive nature of daydreaming in MDS further reinforces the link to post-memory. Individuals with MDS often report a deep emotional connection to their daydreams, blurring the boundaries between reality and fantasy. This emotional intensity can be seen as a reflection of the underlying post-memory related trauma. By delving into these daydreams and examining the thematic elements or recurring patterns, researchers and clinicians can gain insights into the specific trauma or emotional themes inherited through post-memory. Fused between normal daydreaming and maladaptive daydreaming, although they appear to be same but are actually different in their own perspectives. Normal daydreaming is a part of our daily life. It is considered to be pleasant as we are more likely to daydream about pleasant things rather than the unpleasant ones. They can distract us from several activities, but at the same time helps us to boost our creativity, get rid of boredom, and use to aid goal setting. Normal daydreaming occurs entirely in our mind and it is not at all harmful for us. Whereas maladaptive daydreaming is so intense that a person can spend most of the time in daydreaming. They enter into the world of fantasy and it becomes quite difficult for them to keep a pace with the real world. Maladaptive daydreaming often involves themes associated with violence, sexual harassment, trauma, and various horrifying scenarios. Sometimes it becomes so intense that people often get emotionally drained after daydreaming. Due to this immersive nature of daydreaming, people may neglect their relationships and responsibilities in the real world, which makes the situation even worse. According to leading expert and researcher Dr. Ellie Sommer, maladaptive daydreamers have an innate capacity for vivid fantasy that creates a powerful sense of presence. This mental activity is reported to be highly rewarding and therefore can increase the risk of addiction. He notes that when daydreams become more important than the real life and relationships or keeps them from being able to function, it is often a sign that it has become maladaptive. There is actually no evidence-based treatment for people who struggle with this problem. According to Dr. Sommer, if one wishes to better control their fantasy life, is taking help from a mental health professional who specializes in treating habits and behavioral addictions. As it is not a psychiatric disorder, one cannot go to a clinic or a healthcare provider in order to cure this. Instead of that, a 14-item self-reporting test can help to find out if one is suffering from maladaptive daydreaming syndrome or not. In this
I'm
14-part
sorry to
test,
interrupt you, Ms. Angana, but you have 2 minutes to wrap up your presentation.
yeah, sure. Not precisely why maladaptive daydreaming occurs, but they have found some links to other conditions. With no clinical acknowledgement, the problem is treated as a brain biochemical irregularity rather than a habit-forming side effect coming from a void in the singular's life. Maladaptive daydreamers are not viewed in a serious way, soliciting type or reasonable treatment for affirmation, and their psyches are not just imaginative, yet rather than their imagination has a handrail firmly around their throat. Lastly, for itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Angana, for such a wonderful presentation. Since we have 4 papers lined up for the session, I mean, 2 papers will be dealt by one professor each. So I'd like to call Aisha Munira ma'am to give her output on this presentation. Over to you, ma'am.
See, it was indeed a very good paper and well researched, and I think it has many pointers for further research. Instead of calling it a complete project, I would say that it's something that has too many pointers and seminal ideas that can lead to better research paper writing. One thing I would like to add here is that I was supposed to chair another session that was about on literary texts presented as mnemonic objects of history and for psychology, other subjects. But since I missed it, I have been transferred to this session, and this session is very much related with psychology and physiology. It's not my expertise, but still, I would like to say that I would have definitely taken more interest in the testimonial aspect, which has been promised in the abstract. The abstract promises that the paper will be qualitative research, and instead of just being a theoretical um, paper, it will also do some study, qualitative study, which I perhaps missed somehow, or maybe the paper presenter did not get time to come to that point of research. So, actually, presentations are a way to realize, understand the strengths and weaknesses of research in front of an academic community. And since I have been given the privilege to comment on your paper, let me tell you that you can further make it elaborate and perhaps come up with some original idea regarding post memory and maladaptive daydreaming as something that you find in your qualitative research via testimonial method. And there's one thing more you have mentioned here. I'm not going to read your abstract, but I would definitely say that that part would be more interesting, since I'm very sure that your research, your qualitative research, will mm, add something to what has already been said regarding maladaptive daydreaming as something interfering with daily life and daily routine of an individual, and its connection with the post memory. So I think what you would like to add to it will be more interesting and more important in your paper later. Focus on that area more after you have elaborated your framework to understand this phenomenon. That's what I can say. Dr. Fazi is not here. He's an expert, but this is what I have understood by reading Freud and other psychologists uh, as a student of literature. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your valuable words. Nonetheless, it was very enlightening in the light that you sort of rephrase the paper for us. Now, I'd like to call our next presenter, who is Khan Firdaus Fatima, and the title of her paper is Characterization of Trauma and Its Impact on Adult Learners. Over to you, Ms. Firdaus, considering that she's present in this session. I don't think she is here right now, so I'd like to go on with our next presenter, who's Yuvna Tandon, and the title of who's from Vivekananda Institute of Professional Studies, and the title of the paper is "The Trauma Narrative in the Works of Sylvia Plath and Emily Brondt's Characterization of Mental Health." Over to you, Ms. Yuvna.
Thank you so much. Just a second, I'll just present my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you so much. Greetings, everyone. I'm Yuvna Tandon, a student of BA English Honors at Vivekananda Institute of Professional Studies. And my research paper's title is The Trauma Narrative in the Works of Sylvia Plath and Emily Bronte and the Characterization of Mental Health. So this paper mainly aims to explore and compare the portrayal of trauma in The Bell Jar and Wuthering Heights. So if we move on to first the overview of Sylvia Plath's life and her only published novel, The Bell Jar. It was published in 1963. The Bell Jar was mainly to explore the mental illness and societal pressures on women in 1950s America. And the reason this was written is mainly because of the death of Plath's father. He died due to untreated diabetes, followed by her mother's abandonment, along with her husband's betrayal, which made her depressed and led to several depressive episodes, including multiple attempts of suicide. She wrote the semi-autobiographical novel, which shows the protagonist as a shadow of the author, and it is written under a pseudonym, Victoria Lucas, to hide her identity, mainly due to autobiographical elements. And it shows the struggle of Esther, the protagonist, with her mental health, self-identity, sexuality, and societal expectations. Let's see how it characterizes trauma in the novel. bell jar, the Esther is shown as a contestant who wants to become a guest editor at Ladies Magazine, which is quite similar to Plath's real life experience of being an editor at Mademoiselle, one of the magazines. And through the protagonist, she aims to showcase her own mental breakdown and electroconvulsive therapy, which was supposed to fix her mental state and the experiences that both the author as well as the characters share. We see Esther's traumatic experience in the area of love, her betrayal by Buddy, which is quite similar to Plath's husband Ted Hughes' betrayal. One thing that is quite interesting here is that Esther sleeps with Irwin, one of the characters, which leads to her having hemorrhages, which is a consequence of her taking a liberating action. During those times, the societal conduct for women was quite strict, and the fact that Esther had a premarital affair with somebody else was a very provoking idea. This is why Plath took a satirical toll on this particular instance and showed us this event. And we see Esther is supposed to be a very ladylike and a happy-go-lucky character, which is quite opposite to Esther's true identity. She is a person surrounded with melancholy. And this whole idea of hiding a woman's true personality in order to fit in the society is being showcased through this novel. Now, if we look at Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, we find that this novel, which was published in 1847, explores the idea of isolation, revenge, and discrimination through the character of Heathcliff. Bronte herself lived in isolation with a family in the Yorkshire moors, which is quite similar to the moors which was loved by the couple of Heathcliff and Catherine, and they made a lot of memories there. We find Bronte, who lost her mother and siblings due to prevailing diseases, just like Catherine and Isabel. And the main idea in this novel is that marriage was a loveless act. The reason why Emily didn't marry is showcased through Catherine and the repercussions that is faced by Isabel. This idea of the repercussions we will be discussing a little later. So as of now, let's move on to the characterization of trauma in Wuthering Heights. The first thing that is showcased is the intergenerational trauma that is passed from the generations to the children and the repetition of history. This is mainly in the character of Hindley. If we look at the character of Hindley, we find that he passes on his trauma of getting the beatings and the abuse that he got from his father, Mr. Earnshaw, to his own son, Hareton. And the second thing that we find is that the destructive consequence of unresolved trauma, especially in the case of Heathcliff. Heathcliff resorts to violence because of the unresolved trauma, and even Hindley resorts to violence due to the unresolved trauma, which piled up over the years, and since they had no way out of it, they eventually resulted in being insane at the end. And Heathcliff himself is a personification of the word trauma. He is a person who could go to extreme lengths just to extract revenge due to his bruised psyche. He was considered a typical outsider in that novel, which is why he behaved the way he did in the novel. We find that Emily Bronte lost her mother in her early life in the novel, and which is represented in the novel as well. No major character in the novel gets the loving shadow of their mothers, and the only motherly character, the closest thing to a mother that we get in the novel, is Nellie. Now, if we look at the violent aspect of the novel, violence leading to emotional trauma is there, especially in the case of Heathcliff. There is a particular code of masculinity in the novel, and we find that Edgar is able to get the love of his life and is able to woo Catherine mainly because he is a person who is gentlemanlike, unless Heathcliff, who is very wild. Then we have the psychological manipulation, especially by Catherine. She says that she loves Heathcliff, but does not marry him just because of his social behavior and situation. Now, if we look at Emily Bronte herself, she was a victim of unresolved trauma, mainly because she was isolated from the world and did gain the exposure that she deserved. And this damaged her psyche in a way that made her write this novel. And she depicted in this novel a world that she lived in, which was quite opposite from the type of world we people are living. If we compare both the novels, we see that The Bell Jar has Esther Greenwood's unresolved trauma and her desperate attempts to resolve them, which is very similar to Heathcliff's unresolved trauma and how he resorts to violence in order to satisfy himself. And one thing that we find in both the novels is that there are certain repercussions which women face when they go against the general prescribed norms of the society. In the case of Esther, we find how she slept with Irwin and later got hemorrhages. And in the case of Isabel in Wuthering Heights, Isabel decides to marry Heathcliff because she loves him, and that is against the norm of marriage, particularly during those times, because during those times it was believed that you should marry a person who is well settled and gentlemanlike, which was quite opposite to the character of Heathcliff. And this is how she faces the consequences of going against the norm. She lives in an abusive marriage throughout her life. We see Esther is the alter ego of the author. She's a symbol of Plath's own suppressed psyche. And in the case of Bronte, we see that the world that she has depicted is the world that she lived in versus the world that she wanted to live in. And there is an underlying need to gain control over their mental state through temporary distractions. For example, Esther chose electroconvulsive therapy. She decided to live in confinements, but she did not actually focus on the main issues and resolving them. She could not find a way out of those issues. And in the case of Heathcliff, he decided to resort to violence instead of permanently solving those issues and moving on in life. Now, if we look at the psychological and symbolic elements of the bell jar, we find the bell jar as a symbol of depression, restrictions, and constant observation. The reason why Sylvia Plath would have chosen this title is mainly because we can see through a bell jar, we can see the insides of the jar, and it is almost like she was living inside the jar and she was always under constant observation by the society. She had to behave in certain ways which are opposite to her true identity. And we find that confinement can also be a symbolic element, because Plath's own confinement was there in the world. She was confined in the world and she wanted to break out of it somehow. And we find bees as an important symbol. Plath's father had a certain love for bees. His knowledge for bees was extensive, and that is why she held on to that particular symbol in the novel as well as in her life. And in the case of Wuthering Heights, we find the supernatural elements. According to the Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis, we find that when there is guilt inside a subconscious, it eventually comes to a conscious mind through dreams, and the past begins to haunt the present. And this is exactly what happened with Heathcliff. Due to his guilty subconscious, he began to saw the ghost of Catherine. And the houses were also symbolic in this novel. Wuthering Heights is shown as a house of trauma, and Thrushcross Branch is a house of normalcy. That is why when Catherine shifts from the Wuthering Heights and stays at Thrushcross Branch for a week, she becomes more ladylike, because that is kind of a normal household of those times, the kind of house that should have been normal. And if we take the example of hair, we find that Nellie was the hair of Heathcliff, and Edgar in the locket that is worn by Catherine, mainly because she was excessively attached to both the men. And this is and hair is a symbol and a portrayal of excessive attachment of Catherine. So in conclusion, I would like to say that this paper mainly shows how the authors reflect their personal traumas in their works, and they kind of try to find a solace and a peace in their work. And this analysis of trauma mainly reveals that there is an impact of traumatic experiences on the characters and their social relationships, even with the other characters. And there is certain complexity of human suffering, and eventually all these portrayal of trauma and the highlighting the complex and devastating effects of psychological distress on individual lives and social structures, and how they impact the individual's behavior as well. So that is it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shivna, for finishing your presentation within the given time limit. This was such an amazing and comprehensive presentation. Now I'd like to call on Siddiq sir to give his remarks on Yuvna's presentation. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, you're perfectly audible.
Okay, so Yuvna, your paper was nice, but it went somewhere else actually, because the title presumes that you're going to talk about the narrative structure of the novel, and the title is The Trauma Narrative in the Works of Sylvia Plath, and there's nothing about narrative in your paper. You discuss characterization and symbolic, which is quite up to the mark, but the title and the abstract somewhere do not cohere with what you have read. Nevertheless, I think you have taken two very important texts, and from very different scenarios, from very different contexts. One is about almost 18th century and the other is from the American landscape and the modern civilization. And one of the things that I have understood from here that you have mainly discussed is from personal perspective, like what traumas they have felt in their personal life, and because of that, the whole this whole chaotic situation occurred. But at the same time, which was very important, was the social conflict between the savagery and the civilization. Heathcliff was the victim of this conflict because he was a savage, and he was tried to fit in within civilization. Catherine's father tried to do that. He tried to make him a gentleman. So the trauma was not only personal, but it was also more of a social phenomena, which is there. And one of the things that I would like to ask and pinpoint, which I got it wrong. You said that Catherine did some kind of psychological manipulation with Heathcliff. I don't agree with that, because I think she was also the victim of all the same circumstances. So if you want to elaborate on that point, you're welcome to do that. The other thing is that you have mentioned Esther as an alter ego, which is again, I don't agree with. So these 2 points, I think, were not up to the mark. Otherwise, the paper was nice. What you could have done is that you could have brought certain quotes from both the novels, which are showing the traumas, and but the major missing point which I have felt is that you have not talked about the narrative structure, which is very important in terms in the novel called Wuthering Heights, because the narrative is disjointed. It is leaping from past to future, and then there are I think 2 past and the present, and so it is multi-generational that you have talked about. And so that multi-generational aspect led to a narrative which is very fluctuating, and it becomes very confusing. The first time that I have read Wuthering Heights, it did not make sense to me. So the point is that how the narrative structure was visible, that was something I think was missing in the paper. You would have done it better, and I wish you all the best to develop it more. It could be a good paper, considering that these are the 2 major writers, Sylvia Plath and Emily Bronte. And when you're talking about narrative trauma, so I think Sylvia Plath becomes this very important person, as not only with the novel aspect, but also her confessional poetry. So I think you should develop this paper, and if you're talking about a narrative, and please do mention about the narrative structure. That was something I think you should have developed.
Thank you so much, sir, for your
Thank you.
input, and I'll definitely work on that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir, for
Yes.
such a
Am I
detailed.
allowed to say something about it?
Yes, ma'am, by all means.
You've
Sure,
not
please.
paper, you've not Tandon's paper. Actually, this is an area perhaps in which we both the chairs are interested. It's a textual analysis. There are 2 important texts here. One aspect you can have a look at, Yumna, is colonization. The bell jar becomes a symbol of colonization, as well as in case of Wuthering Heights, look at the character of Heathcliff as a person who is colonized. He is a non-white, and he has been purchased. He was purchased in England when England was also a conduit of slavery, a slave trade, and he was kept at home, and definitely he was raised at a civilized household. But the fact remains that violence was the very condition, a very important integral part of the condition of his life. As Frantz Fanon talks about colonization, that in case of colonialism, violence is a condition of life for the colonized man. So there's no escape from it. So what he does later as a big man, as a grown-up man, is something that was already lurking, that has always been a part of, it was all pervasive in his life since his childhood. So we need to keep that in mind instead of, and I always try to distinguish between 2 things: people who are mentally ill, people who are mentally sick. So I don't know how much it makes sense to people who study psychology, but mentally sick people are those who oppress others. Mentally ill people are those who respond and react to some kind of violence. And that's what happens in case of colonization, in case of both Sylvia Plath as well as Heathcliff as a character, of course, in this book.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your output as well. It added so much to the discussion. One of our presenters seems to have joined
Just a second.
this session.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your input. And I'll really add that point, and I really like that aspect of it. Thank you so much.
So, as I was saying, we have, I think, a presenter who has just recently joined us. So I'd like to call again upon Firdaus Khan Firdaus Fatima. And the title of her paper is Characterization of Trauma and its Impact on Adult Learners. Over to you, Ms. Firdaus.
Screen audio, visible to you all?
Yes, Firdaus, it is visible. You can go ahead.
All right. All right, so a very good evening to you all. I am Firdaus Fatima, pursuing MA English Language Teaching from Aligarh Muslim University. And today I'll be presenting my topic, my paper on the topic Characterization of Trauma and its Impact on Adult Language Learners. So we're moving quickly towards the paper, the objectives of the study. This is a review-based paper and observation-based paper. So the objectives were to characterize trauma, not in general terms, but which are specifically found in adult language learners, specifically the English language learners, and the impact that the trauma has on these adult language learners. And the most important objective is to find out roles of English language teachers in trauma healing. So here's a quick introduction. So in general terms, if we talk about trauma, is that trauma refers to an overwhelming experience, right? It is an event that affects an individual's ability to cope up with day-to-day lives, with day-to-day activities of that individual, right? Which results in disruption of their sense of safety, their well-being, and then their stability in general. Now, stability can be their physical stability, their emotional stability, and then their psychological stability as well. Now, one important thing to be noted here is that trauma is often associated with feelings of fear, helplessness, and loss of control, and that can lead to symptoms which are caused due to trauma. Now here it is important to first, I know it's quite general, but it is really important to differentiate between trauma and the symptoms that are caused. Trauma is basically, we can say that trauma is an umbrella term, and anxiety, depression, PTSD, and all of these are the symptoms which are caused due to trauma. And again, it can manifest itself in physical, emotional, and psychological forms. So now over here, one question I think might pop up into your mind is what adult, what type of adult learners here am I talking about? I'm not only talking about adult learners who are just who belong to the socially weaker sections of the society or to the elite sections of the society, because when I discuss about the impact, which you can see over here, the 6 most observed and researched impacts, which I've seen in adult language learners, you can totally understand.
Sorry to interrupt you for those, but I think you should swipe your slides. It's still stuck on the front page. I think it would help you.
Hello?
Yes.
Is it visible now?
No, it has disappeared. You can share it again and skip to the further slides.
All right. Is it now visible?
I don't think so.
Is it visible?
I'm sorry, but I don't think we can see anything.
Is it now visible to you all?
I don't think we can see it.
even I mean right now.
Would it be all right if you could just read out the presentations without having to share the screen with us? I think as long as we are able to hear you orally, I think it would be fine considering the circumstances.
All right, no issues.
Sure, you can go ahead with that.
Okay, so anyway, now talking about the impact. So definitely I'm talking about adults who belong both to the weaker sections of the society and also to the elite sections of the society. Because no matter what, I mean, what the status of the student is, what I mean, the status of the language learner is, but everyone faces trauma. So the first one is definitely the cognitive impact. Now, cognitive is all related to the mind, which affects the functioning of their memory, attention, and concentration. Right. So now basically they may, I mean, the adult learners, they may struggle with learning new information, organizing thoughts, and retaining knowledge. Now definitely all these kind of trauma not only, I mean, affects the language in as a whole, but rather the skills, the sub skills that are there in the language learning process, right? So now most important thing, the critical thinking ability is really important while you learn any language, especially English language. So when you're cognitive, when a person faces cognitive, cognitive trauma, I mean, sorry, the mental trauma, so their cognitive abilities get affected. Next, we have the emotional impact. Emotional is definitely, as I mentioned earlier, it can result in emotional distress such as anxiety, fear, anger, and a heightened state of arousal. Now, there are two types of arousal, basically the hyperarousal and the hypoarousal. Now, hyperarousal is basically, just a minute. Yes, hyperarousal is basically when you display extreme emotion of fear and anger and guilt, while on the other hand, hypoarousal is basically when you lack these kind of expressions, when you don't portray your emotions, basically you give a flat reaction to everything, and you go numb. That is what you know. That is what you call as emotional or basically hypoarousal, right? So they may definitely, learners may have mood swings, and they may diminish their self-esteem and then struggle. So in a way, it affects their language learning. And then the behavioral impact. Now, over here, what happens is the language learners, they avoid certain topics or situations or discussions in language learning, in the process of language learning, which triggers their memories. Here, triggering comes into play, and individuals, they become hyper vigilant or easily startled, making it difficult, difficult for them to feel safe and secure in a learning environment. So over here, learners, they withdraw themselves, they face isolation and difficulties in establishing maintaining relationships with their peers especially. And the most important impact is the interpersonal impact. Here, definitely, when we talk about language learning, definitely interpersonal communication and all of these things comes into play. Basically, communication comes into play. So when students who face such kind of trauma, they have difficulties, exhibit difficulties with communication, their boundaries, their collaboration, right, with their instructors, their classmates, and support staff, and everyone. So they face problem in they face problem while learning, in their learning experience, and especially while accessing to resources, because only if you communicate, you will be able to access to the resources and learning takes place. But definitely when you're not able to communicate itself, you'll not be able to access information. Then the physical impact. Physical impact, over here comes the sleep disturbance, the chronic pain, indigestion and illness, and physical consequences of trauma, and all of these things. And the last one is the triggers and flashbacks, which I believe is quite common to you all. And that is basically adult learners who have experienced this trauma may have triggers that elicit intense emotional or physiological responses associated with the traumatic event. So that triggers can be, now the different types of triggers and flashbacks. There can be words, images, smells, or sounds that remind them of the traumas, right? So flashbacks, intrusive memories, the nightmares and all. So all these things engage or basically hinder the learning process. And the last and the most important thing is the role of English language teachers in trauma healing. Over here, we can say that the role that teachers can play over here, they're quite general things, but really important to be played, which mostly gets neglected. So the first thing is to like include intelligences that may be neglected in traditional language classrooms. So in a way to address the needs of trauma affected youth, in order to have multiple channels for self-expression and language learning. And then next is the integration of language instruction with self expression and exploration of social relationships, that is help students to understand themselves, get to know basically this trauma. And there is this concept of trauma informed instruction, that is you give instructions in a way where you are aware of what the traumas students are facing, and you integrate language instruction and you use language in a way that does not trigger them. Is language instruction that explains the trauma healing process. Now again over here, although there is further investigations that are needed, but I personally believe that English language teachers play a significant role in trauma healing for learners, because artful acts of instruction are therapeutic, right? And promoting both wholeness and effective instruction for all learners, because I believe English is quite an art, it's quite an English, therapeutic language, and not just English, all the languages, but since my paper focuses on English more, so this is a really important role which teachers play. So in conclusion, we can say that trauma can be characterized as a distressing or disturbing experience that causes, again, physical, emotional, and psychological or spiritual harm, and can have long-lasting effects on an individual's well-being and functioning. And trauma can result from a wide range of experiences, including physical or sexual abuse, domestic violence, natural disasters, wars, accidents, and chronic illness. That is why I've mentioned earlier that adults who belong to any section of the society, who, it's not necessarily only the weaker sections face all these problems, even the upper or the elite sections also face these problems. So we cannot say that if only a particular section faces trauma. So so it is associated with feelings of, again, fear, helplessness, and all. And treatment options for trauma may include therapy, which can be any kind of therapy, medication, and support groups, among others. Thank you so much.
Sorry to interrupt. All right. Great timing, Firdaus. Your time was actually about to be up. Now we have reached the end of this session. And since this was the last paper of this presentation, I'd like to invite both the chairs to give their remarks one by one on this presentation. Ma'am, Aisha ma'am, do first.
I think Dr. Khan may speak before me. It's all right. It's up to you.
Anyone can go.
Okay, okay, so one of the two things which I have noticed in the paper, which could have been, again, better analyzed, you could have talked about those pedagogical tools and changes that you are wanting to bring in the education system. So let's say that the technological aspect could have been more fruitful and therapeutic, as you told us. The other thing is that when we're talking about a language, the role of language, and we're talking about English language, and you said that English has this maybe have a capacity to let the learners to express themselves. I think one of the things that you could have added in your paper is that their own mother tongue could also help them a lot, because trauma should be confessed. There's a therapeutic process of confession, right? With respect to trauma. So I think because we are talking in the times of decolonization. So let's not say that English has this capacity alone. Let's say that whatever language you mentioned this, I'm not saying that you haven't, but there could have been more elaboration on the aspect of the language in which the speaker is more capable, more expressive, and in which the learner has more accessibility. Because a lot of time, we Indians face a lot of time, we're not being able to know these psychological theories, and because they are in English, first of all, right? So we could have certain Hindi stories, because there are so many Hindi stories which showcase the psychological process. So the reading process could have been here as a pedagogical tool. Let them read those stories which can actually make them individualize the experience with the characters, and let them understand the process of healing through their own language. But English was also, I think, because it's a global language, and if a learner has access to English, if he's competent in English, I think it will be again fruitful for the learner.
Thank you, sir.
Ma'am, if you have anything to add to this exchange.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. So, yeah, actually, I was looking at your abstract, and I just saw that in the abstract, the title, you did not spell it out, that it was going to be about adult English language learners. So, it would rather be better for researchers to spell out the key ideas in the title itself. Learners of what? That is a question. So, adult learners of English. And then how it becomes a hindrance. This is what perhaps your title promises: characterization of trauma and its impact on adult learners of English. This could be the title. And impact is quite broad. We don't know whether the impact is going to be positive or negative. So we don't know what actually the title promises. And later we discover that it talks about how trauma can lead to learning disability. So perhaps if this could be more focused, since you wrote this paper for this seminar, if you could make it more focused, like you're going to talk about trauma leading to learning disability, especially vis-a-vis language learning, then perhaps the paper may sound more focused, and you may develop a theoretical framework around it, and how traumas lead to learning disability, and especially regarding language learning, and especially this particular language, English. Coming to the point, you have taken into account too many points, but all the points cannot be accommodated in one paper. For example, you have also taken into account the fact or the idea that language learning may also be therapeutic. So either you focus on disability, or you focus on therapy, or if you are focusing on both, there should be a very clear link between the two. How from disability, language learning can lead to therapy, a kind of therapy for the trauma a person may have endured in the past, due to which he or she is suffering from some kind of disability. So that would have been a better concrete paper. Coming to English, rule of English and rules of English that we teach. So English itself, as Dr. Sadiq obliquely referred to it, I guess, English itself can be a language that has come to us by way of violence. We did not invite English, and it's not too long ago. I mean, just 7 decades ago, or a little more than 7 decades ago, English was an imposition on us. And it happened at the cost of erosion of our culture and our mother tongue. And it's not a process which is benign, and which is something that psychologically people accept. We may learn English, at the same time we always suffer from a complex. That has, again, I don't know, I'm coming back to Frantz Fanon again today, and Gandhiji as well as Tagore both have talked about this problem, this psychological complex people suffer from in ex-colonies. Frantz Fanon talks about being French, being white and being French, and the better French you speak, the more white you become. In his Black Skin, White Mask, he talks about it, and how French becomes a kind of benchmark for your refinement and civilization. If you cannot speak French, you are not a civilized person, which splits a person from his own self. That's why he says that there is a kind of alienation. And that is a very extreme, that's an extreme kind of violence that occurs inside human psyche. He discusses it in detail in Black Skin, White Masks. So if you would like to theorize this further and understand this problem further, you should go through it. It's a very interesting work, and written much before the important post-colonial theorists started writing, like Edward Said and Gayatri Spivak and others. But Frantz Fanon's writings are definitely very important in the sense that he bases his arguments on psychological problems that colonized men suffer from. And since our concern today in this seminar is a huge psychological problem, that is trauma, you explain it well when you said that either a person becomes hyper aroused or he or she remains hypo aroused. Either there is a suppression or there is too much of expression. Either way, one is maladjusted. And the reason is some kind of huge impact on on his or her psychology, that is called trauma. So in order to understand it, we need to study Freud. And trauma studies in the 20th century became very important. And, Yasir Arafat and Abdullah, all these people came together, Sharmeen, all these people came together and under the guidance of some teachers, thought of having a seminar on this topic. It's very important. Still, it's important because war and conflict that had been a benchmark of, history, mnemonic history, recorded history, are still going on in the world in the 21st century also. And somehow we are not able to come out of the impact, and we are not able to come out of the impact of the previous century that saw huge 2 world wars. And we are still facing, some kind of 3rd world war is lurking on the horizon. It's always so. We never know what's going on. We have Ukraine and Russia. We have Palestine. We have Kashmir. We have many other places in the world. I'm not going to name them all. But you know that violence is a very important part of human existence somehow. So we have to understand trauma all the time, and we have to also understand how trauma as a part of mnemonic history impacts our thinking and also cultural productions and also learning and all the aspects of human life. So it's a very important topic indeed that you have thought of taking. In the 20th century, there were 3 points. Cathy Caruth, I'm taking help of a writer, Cathy Caruth. She's an important name so far as trauma studies are concerned. She talks about 3 points that led to trauma studies becoming very important in the 20th century. She says that, first of all, Freud, psychoanalysis. Number 2, she talks about wars being playing an important role in leading people to study, understand trauma. And number 3, she talks about laws which were devised during the 20th century in order to contain such outbursts like wars. And those laws, nonetheless, were no less violent. As Foucault says, when you try to control violence, you actually veil it under some kind of law. Violence still remains, it still exists, but it is veiled or it is given some kind of, it is given the name of some kind of discipline in law, rules and laws. So these are the 3 points, 3 reasons why we are talking about trauma, and throughout this 20th century, trauma studies and memory became very important. Until now, we are talking about this trauma and memory today. So I've tried to say a lot in a few minutes because I know I'm not the keynote speaker here, but still, because this is an area in which I'm interested, I thought that I should give some points, share some points with my students. And definitely, Firdaus, you can make your paper more focused. All of us are students here, but you are beginners because you're you're still studying. So either you focus on disability and how English can either be traumatic, it can definitely be traumatic. For migrants, especially, I've read a lot of poems in which Syrian and Indian writers say that the language of the foreign land becomes traumatic for their parents, especially because of the fact that they are not able to pronounce the sounds correctly, and they remain a foreigner in a new place, and they are never accepted. And along with it comes racism, xenophobia. So it's more traumatizing instead of being therapeutic. I don't know. We have to find, you have to actually be more focused. Thank you very much, the organizer, for inviting me to be a part of it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for such an in-depth review. It's always so pleasant to listen to you, ma'am. We would have invited questions from the audience, but I think we're running very short of time. So I would
Can
like
I
to
ask just one question?
Sure, sir, please.
So this question is first of all to Firdaus. You have said, forgive me if I have missed it. You have said in your abstract that the paper is a review-based research and extracts its authenticity with the analysis of the previous paper. I think you have not mentioned which papers are you talking about.
Yes, sir. Actually, I couldn't mention this in the presentation.
I mean, the whole purpose was that
Yes,
you should have
yes,
mentioned
yes.
that. Yeah.
Yes,
So,
sir. Actually, but like I can name it.
yeah.
Yeah, it is basically it is Mind to Soul Journal, which was written in 2018. It was written by it was published. It was written by Rachel Johnson in 2000.
Just give me the title.
Trauma and Learning: Impacts and Strategies for Adult Classroom Success.
Okay, so how do you find that your paper was a little different from this paper?
Basically, this paper focused more on the strategies which were used for the children, the young students. I focused on the adult learners. Okay. Because it is quite common in for young children to face this issue, but then it is even predominant in adult learners as well. So I had to narrow down my my subject. So I narrowed it down to the adult learners. That's the reason.
Okay, fine.
And the strategies which were used for the classes ranging from KG to 12th standard. It was not for the adult learners. So that was the difference.
So this particular section should have been mentioned in the very first line, actually. That
yes,
this is the paper I'm going to use, right? Because you're basing your paper, the whole paper is based on certain papers, and not just one paper. You should have taken more papers. Okay. So I have another question with to Simanta. The first speaker.
It was, I think, Angana. If we have Angana in this session.
Achha, okay, Angana. Yeah. Anyone from?
Do we have Angana here? She's not responding.
Okay, she's not here. Yeah. The audience can go on. Yeah, you can. I mean, if you have questions from the audience, then ask.
Actually, sir, we could have arranged a session, but we are running very short on time. So we are now reaching the end of this session. I'd like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to both the professors for accepting the invitation to chair this session, both Siddiq sir and Aisha ma'am. Thank you so much. Now I thank our presenters for participating in this conference, making it a success, and keeping the interdisciplinary spirit of this conference alive. I'm sure we all have benefited a lot from this exchange of ideas today. Thanks everyone again. This session has come to an end. I and the chairs will be exiting now. The attendees are requested to please stay back for the next session that will begin shortly. Have a good day.